Hello, people. This week I read Roots of the Mountain by William Morris. Now, William Morris, this is going to go under the Tolkien playlist because that's how I found this author. He's from the 1800s. I was on a forum, a Tolkien forum, and somebody said this is the person who inspired Tolkien. So, of course, I had to go check it out. Now, most of these books are free. They're in the public domain, so excellent price. You can also, I think I also bought like the complete works of for like $1 or $2 off of Amazon. That's also fantastically priced. I would suggest you get them both. And especially if you're like a big Tolkien fan, I think you'll very much appreciate it. But this is, I would say, not the easiest read. I think at some point somebody told me that The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit was difficult for them to read. Like the language was hard, which I don't know, it kind of threw me, but you know, they're lovable casuals, so we're not going to hold it against them. But what I will say is it can be difficult. See if I can explain it. Here's the full title. And if this title doesn't do something for you, right? If you don't, you don't feel it warm inside, so to speak, then I would skip this book. The Roots of the Mountain, wherein is told somewhat of the lives of the men of Bergdale, their friends, their neighbors, their foemen, and their fellows in arms. That's the full title. And it's hard for me to explain what it does something for me. It's almost like if you're a fan of jazz and you start hearing a saxophone or something, right? Just the sound of it is already feeding me, right? So if that doesn't do it for you, then I think you will have issues with this book. I think there are parts where the verbiage gets more difficult. Not that you don't know how to read or won't be able to understand what's happening, but the pace of it will be different for you than it is for me or, you know, expert readers out there. And in that sense, you will then not be, I guess, ingesting it at the right speed. It'd be like if you go to a fancy restaurant, but then you let your food get cold. It's not exactly what the chef wants. You just still ate it and still might have tasted good, but it could have been better. So, in that sense, you know, don't actually read this one. What I would suggest if you're in that sort of boat is to go read Shakespeare or watch some of the plays. 2 or 3 at least. Preferably something like from the 70s or back. The 80s got kind of weird, and the 90s was too like gritty realism or something like this. Okay, so go watch old Shakespeare. A couple of times, I think it'll juice you up, right? You'll start to understand in that. Like hitting the gym, you'll get better at reading, and then you'll be able to take this better. I know it sounds weird. I'm not playing though, actually. Once upon a time, amidst the mountains and hills of a fair land, there was a town or thorp in a certain valley. This is how we start. That's how the first chapter starts. Just before we get, you know how they do, like, they'll quote something or something like this just before the chapter starts. We get like a poem before. Big into poems. There's multiple poems and songs in this book. It's fantastic. But that's how we start the story. And then he starts to describe sort of the land that they're in. There's a pacing and a purpose, right, to everything that's described in a book. So if I get a modern murder mystery book. There are things that are put in, things that are not put in, that feed the modern audience. And if you go back far enough, like to the Greeks, to the Romans, this kind of an energy, they are completely disconnected from everything that we have. And it shows in their writing. And in these writings, you have maybe more extended time given to, the description of rocks and things like this. Subtle mentions of the gods, right? Almost in passing. This is some of the energy you have in this book where he doesn't tell you, right? He won't tell you the time frame, the place. Now the valley was some 10 miles of our measure from the place of the rocks and the stone ridges to where the faces of the hills drew somewhat anigh to the river again at the west, and then fell back along the edge of the great plain, right? He's describing a valley surrounded by like sheer mountainous walls and forest. There's streams and lakes, but he goes almost, it's not out of his way, right? That's the thing. It's not out of his way. But the style of the description already starts to feed me the time frame we're dealing with. He's not going to talk like this and we're going to get to town and I'm going to see someone drive up in a car, automatically. So he's using the words, the structure of them to feel like these old Greeks, these old Romans, this old kind of language, because they were interested, right? They didn't have all the things we had. They had, rivers that a god might be in, lakes that might mean a thing or two. The defendable land is important for a sense of security, right? These kind of energies that come from reading these things that are not said, but flavor the writing. He picks up on this flavoring and just lays it out all along this book. It's tremendous. But it is going to be at a slower pace than a modern reader's used to. He describes sort of the peoples. They're the Dalesmen. And I'm like, again, the city of Dale, literally, from Lord of the Rings. I'm going to find a lot of these small similarities. And I'm going to mention Tolkien a lot. I'm not saying these are connected to Tolkien. They're not. But our William Morris wrote what he wrote. And our Tolkien's as good a writer as he is. And if, again, I'm going to a restaurant a lot. I guess these are a good analogy. If your favorite restaurant tastes a certain way, and your food kind of tastes like theirs, but you're a really good chef, then that's not an accident. It's a tip of the hat. It's an homage, right? I think this is the energy Tolkien gives me that leads me to connect these stories. It would be like, so if we have a timeline, and here's Aragorn way back here, at some point we get to now. In between, it's in your mind, if you think like Aragorn's bloodline never failed, at some point he might, or some of his descendants might end up in Bergdale, right? Way back in our medieval history or past, right? So medieval is more recent to us than this story is to anything, right? And if you imagine Aragorn's blood just sort of trickling through till it gets to, of course, the kings of England or something else like this, you start to see these very cool similarities in one style of writing, but two, in sort of what's happening with the characters. It's very subtle. It is very subtle, I'll admit. But it is there, and I think you'll see it, especially if you're a big time fan of Tolkien. Again, this is a side note for me and my personal enjoyment. Doesn't inhibit the book any. And speaking of the book, he wrote it way back in the day, so I think technically Story-wise, it's like a sequel to... God, what's the other book? It's a sequel to... I wrote all these notes and I don't have it in here. And I can't think of it right now. House of the Wolfings or something like this. I already did a review over it. But even William Morris doesn't like... Again, in our modern age, you would tie those two together and let it be known. He doesn't. If the reader can pick up the threads and you can clearly see these connections, you'll see them. But if you don't, it doesn't matter, because in his mind, I guess, history moved on in a kind of a way. And the perspective changed, because we're not dealing from the perspective of the wolf people this time. So even he, in his mind, doesn't have these long sequels of stories, because that's not what they did back in the ancient Greek times and whatnot, right? So if he did, I mean, it would almost ruin the feel. It's very committed to this feel to me. We have three, I guess, groups of people. We have the dalesmen, the woodsmen, and the shepherds. And he makes sure to make a delineation between these people, because you always have this. The dalesmen are taller, more noble. The other are shorter, still honorable, but they live in like thatched roofs versus a brick town. You know, there's something in the old stories about the nobility, the royal blood, this kind of an energy that almost requires you to have this separation from people. And again, Tolkien does the same thing when he's talking about the men of Gondor and Númenórean blood and this and that. Again, it's just a small flavoring. But I feel it. I'll pick up on it. We come to the main house of the Dale of Bergdale, being the House of the Face. It's called this because there's a large face of some kind of heroic person, you know, with a dragon at his feet and, you know, arrows like rays in his hand, and this sort of overall inspiring face. A terror, but smiling, right? It's carved into the door, and its motif is carved throughout the house. So they're the House of the Face. And the people in this town, right, so the woodsmen eat off the land, and the shepherds have their sheep. But the dalesmen have pears and cherries and plums and chestnuts. They have wine. They have vineyards. They're the rich-to-do people. Thus then live this folk in much plenty and ease of life, though not delicately, nor desiring things out of measure. I have to describe, I say I as in the author, has to describe a free people that don't have a hard life. It's a secure valley. They're not getting overrun by, you know, bandits every 5 minutes. But they're also not soft pansies who, you know, are decadent. It's a subtle line he has to cross. And they call the Dale they deemed the blessing of earth. And this is another thing where your gods in this time are very close to the people. It comes up a lot. And this is a thing that always happens in these old tales with, you know, I guess old fantasy and especially old mythologies, where the gods are more entwined with day-to-day than sort of nowadays. Also, this idea of a land, right? A blessing of the earth. The land gave them something for some reason. This, to me, ties really well with Tolkien. Because what he likes to do, I think, admittedly, He has things the best they'll ever be, and it slowly trickles down to us, right? So the way we live is way less good than the elves. The elves are always the best. And then above them is the undying land where the gods live, the Valar. And I think the Valar give the elves an island to help them get to the undying land. And there's a to-do with it. It's pulled by swans. I'm not making this up. After some of the wars, they give men also a land of their own. Like, here's our blessed land we're going to give you as a gift. There's always gifts of land. Of course, they mucked it up. Numenor sank. But it's like a proof of concept. And I can imagine now, we trickle it down the eons to these people. And instead of a whole island where that didn't work last time, let's just sort of bless an area to be nice until they muck it up, right? There's always this idea of a chosen people and them messing it up. But we're in the spot before they messed it up, right? I think you'll see it. I really do. Our main character is called Face of God. He's tall, strong, very fair of limb and face, white skin, golden hair. Of course, he has to be tall. Again, the Tolkien does the same thing. And they both do the thing that the old stories do, where something in the physical nature of a person denotes sort of purity and godlyhood. But I do have to also mention before I move on is this Face of God. It's face-of-God. That's his full name. He does this a lot where as you're reading, just a word's capitalized. And now that then in turn is its name. It's not just Dale. It's not just a Dale. It's Dale. It's not just Face of God. It's, capitalized Face of God. And that's all you get. You don't get any kind of marker as to where on earth this is, who these people are. It's detached from reality in that sense. And I guess, sort of akin to Indians, right? Where it's Standing Bear and White Buffalo. That kind of energy, where if you say it through the Indian language, it just sounds like a name to an English speaker. But to a native speaker, they hear that it's these two words combined. I guess I'm going to assume it's that kind of an energy. So for them, it was Face of God. For us, it would be some Welsh-sounding name, Gwendolyn, and means like light maiden or something like this, right? This kind of an energy. And that just lends itself to it. Each one of these things that he does well pulls you further back in time, just effortlessly. It's very interesting. He comes inside. I have to mention this part too. He cried out in a cheery voice, "Ho, Kettle, are all men gone without doors to sleep so near the wintertime that the hall is as dark as a cave? Hither to me, or art thou also sleeping?" To me, this is almost the part that lifts it to genius levels. He's good enough to hold the language to be ancient in his narration. And in between narration, we'll have characters speaking. And then they speak in that art thou also sleeping Shakespeare level. And it just, the fact that the characters don't talk like the narrator, but that both are already old, it's genius to me. He doesn't slip on the language either. All the characters talk like this. It's just the richest, to me, language you can have. It's so tasty. But that's the part I would say may be hard for a casual to grab and ingest as you go. Not to mention the songs that just get cut in and out. His lady friend is literally named Bride. Not the bride, just Bride, capitalized. She's kinsman of those chiefs and great men that men of the face traditionally marry. Again, we have this separation of peoples that there's royal blood, or at least worthy blood that's not commingled between her and him, and that makes their marriage worthy. She's red hair, lots, it says lots of red hair, tall, well knit, and well measured, rather than slender and wavering. Her voice sweet and soft. It says she doesn't talk a lot, but that anyone who hears her talk is happy they heard. I'm mentioning these interactions. When you read it, the same as the description of the land, they will be drawn out. He's not afraid of using words, even though it's not that long of a story. You really get to, as a reader, sit in. It's like you're like even before Vikings, you're just in the great hall with these people in this mythological time. It's really like you get to live it. That's sort of, to me, a big part of the fun of these books. At some point, they talk about the woods, again, without saying it. Back in olden times, woods are seen as this sort of like mystical land where anything can happen. He says there's rights that love not men, ghosts that may not rest, wandering. He says there's wandering dwarves. I said dwarves? I said dwarves? Dealers in marvels, givers of gifts that destroy houses, forgers of the curse that clingeth to the murderer, that flitteth to and fro. And again, if you just see we're not talking a ring of power, obviously, but what was that? It was an item that was made that did this bad thing. Right? Well, clearly history will learn, quit making rings of power. But crafting things and imbuing things doesn't end, especially in a world where there's still dwarves hanging around and elves, but they leave when, things get rough. It says that in this book, mind you. And that because even in Tolkien, these people have an effect on man. That's almost the point of the mythology. The man has this agency, but the others are, in a way, tied to that agency. So I can imagine now, in this world, there are, I was taught by that one, who was taught by this one, who was taught by this one, like 7, 10 generations, 12 generations down. So he has some skill, and if you look forward, it's more than anyone else has. But it's way less than what used to be. And that can be a gift that destroys houses, right? It turned everyone greedy. Or have we heard that before, right? It makes you vicious, a murderer. You can't help yourself. There's dangers in these woods. We do quite a lot of singing in this book. There are long, some are back and forth songs. And again, this is an old style storytelling where, you have to kind of entertain the people while they're at the Greek play, otherwise they'll leave and you'll be broke. I'm assuming that's where this kind of thing comes from. But it's also in Tolkien, where the god and the gods, the Valar, sing creation. They sing everything into existence. And of course, Melkor's singing his own tune and messing stuff up, but he can't mess everything up. Right? There's the power in song. And songs are, from the voice. And so then there becomes a power in words. If you read Tolkien, there's a lot of be careful about oaths you make. There's, all that glitters isn't gold, talking about Aragorn. There's a lot of verbiage turning to reality. No man shall kill me, right? Your old Witch King really hung his hat on that one. And in that, you get the sense in this one of, I do. There's some connection to the gods with these songs. And again, even if you're cutting out the Tolkien connection, you're like, I'm not going to go that deep into it. You get a spiritual feel from these songs, like it's We're not just people singing in the song, right? It's not just chestnuts roasting over the open flame. These aren't just happy songs. That there's more to the song for these people than just the song. You do get a regalness or spirituality to it in some way. We're drawing to us more than a normal life, which is the responsibility of royals, right? They have to do that, not normies. Face of God goes exploring in the woods, and it says specifically that he drinks of the woodland water, and then he has some really intense dreams that he can't sort through and almost forgets by the time he wakes up. And again, I think of Faramir and Boromir hanging around the river Anduin, and they have dreams, and that's why they end up going to the council, to Elrod's council, because of this dream they had. The gods, it's one of the Valar talking to humans, to man through the water. There's a connection there. I'm not just grabbing at straws. You'll see. Walking along the next day, he's attacked. The dude chucks a spear at him, and almost knocks the spear out of his hands. It's a full-on fight until someone knocks the attacker out with a big stick. The person who does this is a very, very pretty lady. He's instantly, you can tell, he's about it. He wants to get involved, as they say. He says her beauty grew and grew till she seemed as awful as a goddess. He's really taken by her. It seemed to him as if she were the fairest and most noble of all the queens of ancient story. She ends up naming herself Friend. Some of her companions end up being names like Woodwise and Bow-May. They're mountain people. But again, the way it's told, it's almost almost a fantastical energy. But it's to get across sort of a royal lineage from these people. He goes and he eats with them. At some point, that night, he gets up. It's either at night or early in the morning. And he sees her sitting up on a dais, I think. Clad in a white smock whose hems were broidered with gold wire and precious gems of the mountain, and over that a gown woven of gold and silver. On her head a fillet of gold and gems, wondrous rings on her arms, and her bare feet are on a wolfskin rug. I'm pretty sure in Tolkien, Arwen literally is like sewing or weaving Aragorn a banner, inlaid with silver and all this mess. Is it silver or mithril? She might have put mithril thread in there. I don't remember for certain. I need to read it all again, apparently. So I'm like, it says there's nothing on earth. There could be next to nothing on earth, maybe one or two things that equal this thing in its grandeur. I'm like, it gotta be, when you read it, it feels like gifts of the gods or something, right? Or in my case, elves clearly gave you that as a gift. All to delineate royalness. The wolf, even her feet aren't touching the ground, but they're touching that wolf rug. Now, what did I say? House of the Wolfings is the other book. If you had read that one, you're already getting that one's vibes in this one. But he never says, go read that other book. Really, it's really disconnected sequel as far as we're used to. Remember, it was the 1800s. I don't know if they did that very much back then. She somehow also knows everyone in town, because a royal has to be knowledgeable about their surroundings. Now, she sends up, he takes it as mythical, right? She's this, this might not be real life he's dealing with. But she says that, her and her brother just went in town in disguise. Literally, she made her light skin dark with berry juice or something. I'm like, I don't know how much I'm believing that, but I guess I'll just take it. She doesn't, he wants to know a lot, but she doesn't tell him much. She just says, I'll send a token that will lead you to us in the shadowy veil, and then I'll tell you everything. And I'm like, that sounds ominous. He says, fine. Now, us as readers, you can clearly sense, like, he likes this lady. He likes this lady. He is betrothed to the bride, though. Right? Now, for modern readers, you're like, well, they're not married. No muss, no fuss. But in those days, it isn't no muss, no fuss. Because they would see wrong to be cosmically corrected, right? So if I did a bad thing, the bad things in my life are going to be because of that. Unless I can find creative ways around it, right? So, he never flat out says, I like this lady more than the other. He just sort of leans that way. We try and give it the energy of the gods, right? So, all these people are, just pawns in the game of the gods. So that if the gods or fate need you with this lady instead of another, there's not much you can do. And in that sense, if you never did anything wrong, we can just blame it on the gods, and then no one's really to blame. And later, like, to strengthen this, the bride asks, like, I think she gets a sense of something. She gets a sense of something just in, I guess, how eagerly he's looking at her versus how he used to. And she asks for a gift, and he's like, well, go ahead and name it. And what she asks for is, I'm like, you're going to ask for his second-born son? To me, it's wild, but the guy instantly agrees. And here's where it shows levels. Because we do this in ancient stories a lot more. They'll have men fight. That's the thing to do for men. That's where the gods show themselves, favor on you or not, a lot of times. Women sometimes fight. And of course, they can't beat all the dudes, but they can show up in a fight. But their real strength always lies in some weird mystical power, right? So, that she sensed something was wrong. It is in this story, you get the sense like it's the god sort of telling her that she asks for this kind of a gift, which seems wild to us. And then he agrees. It turns into one of these like foresight abilities. Not that she's actively seeing the future, but when she goes with her feeling, these people in these times would assume that that feeling is from the gods, if that makes sense, right? And so in that sense, that's her fate. And it's a way to repay her for saying I'll marry you and then not. And so now we're balanced out, and neither of us have to take anything negative. But then I'm also thinking of it like as, someone who likes reading a lot of history, where you always see like a great king and he has two sons and then they always go to war because they can never just be like, I'll own this half and you'll own that. It's always a war. So that if the gods like encourage her to ask for that son, he'll be raised separate. And so we won't have that natural animosity. He won't grow up thinking he deserves any part of the land. The other one will just rule. But we also then, we being the gods, preserve this bloodline, right? Because lots of things happen in history. But if this one's separate, and then this part of the house falls, here was this one branch that was still of the good Aragorn blood that can then be replanted and regrow in a different way. Right? And again, it delineates down because it's not a lineage of the firstborn son. It's the secondborn son. But when you don't have any other options, secondborn is closer to Aragorn's blood than firstborn, but firstborn's all gone. This kind of an energy, right? You see these in royal houses too a lot, where, well, I was the cousin Yeah, but I was the daughter, and you get into arguments. But that's the sense that I got, where like the gods are stopping a problem before it starts. He goes back to town and they start to have these little attacks, these odd attacks. And at one point, these attackers who they haven't caught before, like, were emboldened. And they break into a woodlander's house. Great sort of hall they have. And the guy gets up, starts trying to fight him. Straight naked, he is. Which I'm like, I'm like, well, naked dude. But they see it as like bravery. He didn't wait to get armor or nothing. He just went after it. And, he ends up dying, but he kills 2 of them before he goes down. Honorable way to go. The description of them: short of stature, crooked-legged, long-armed, very strong for their size, with small blue eyes, snub-nosed, wide-mouthed, thin-lipped, very swarthy of skin, exceeding foul of favor. I'm like, it's just a bad, no good guy straight out of casting. I think they end up calling them the Dusky Men. Again, just a capitalized name. I don't know where they're from. I think they mentioned like a red skirted kind of gear. But it's all the description we get of them. We don't ever have them as characters. They never talk. They're really just an antagonist. So the token comes and leads them through this just impossible path through the mountains. And invisible until you're like right up on it. The dog leads him through this path. And he sees another valley that he didn't know was there because it's on the other side of the mountains and they don't go there. He has to go through what they call a doom ring before he gets to the house. They always make a point of saying, like, when he'll cross a threshold, when a doom ring is crossed. Because where regal blood goes, like the literal steps they take, become hyper important in this weird cosmic sense. I just love the energy he keeps with this. I'm talking like real people, like when Charlemagne entered such and such town, it's remembered in this kind of way. He's a real person. So to grab that flavor and put it in this story, I enjoy it to no end. And also these doom rings are like a Stonehenge kind of situation where I'm not sure if that's what they were used for or not, but our author's taking them as like, we all come in the stones and we make big decisions gathered in this area. This town does it. The Bergdale does it as well. It's the type of people they are. Here he meets a friend again, and they give a full history. That she is of the peoples of the wolf. That they had, they were driven out by a foe that couldn't be stopped. And they made it into Shadowy Vale, and later, after some time, they needed more space. And so they moved into, or found a way into, Silverdale. And you're just imagining like a river or a woods or just mountains hiding these valleys in this kind of a way. They said they found it peopled, but they didn't have like genocide the people out. They sort of got along with them. And she makes a point to mention that some people commingled with these people. And that they became, soft. They had less of an edge. So when the Dusky Men found them, only her sort of clan stayed true to the wolf blood. And they held off, but the other ones caved. They're like, I'd rather be a thrall, which is a slave. They say thrall. They'd rather be a slave than maybe risk dying. The wolf people fought hard, but at some point they realized it's over, and they snuck back out into Shadowy Vale. And they've been a small clan since. What do they say of the swarthy men, of the Dusky Men? They say, they asked no more of us than all we had. This is how they're described. They're takers, they're rapists, they're vicious, they drive you, like even to slavery, right? Like some of the Bergdale people will have slaves, thralls. captured in battle. But they treat them nice. They talk to them like Romans used to do. Some Roman slaves were treated basically like a secretary, right? So the idea that these people would just grind a person down to useless and then happily kill them just to show you how bad a person they are. They're just vicious for no reason to no gain. They just, like locusts, they just eat. And in the end, it was her and 235 men, women, and children who made it out back into Shadowy Vale. So they were a small, almost destitute people. Some of them, her brother included, decide to go to the cities. And their idea is, we'll sell our valor, we'll get money, and maybe we'll, become a king in one of these cities and bring back an army and, liberate our people. That doesn't end up happening, but they do come back with battle experience, the ones that come back. And so they live in Shadowy Vale and they sneak through and they'll do what damage they can to these dusky men. And then she's like, the dusky men are heading to Burgdale. At some point, they're going to get in there. Once they find it, they'll come in droves. They won't care. And she's basically, he wants to marry her, and she wants, him to get them their land back, essentially. Well, you asking a lot, but I guess if she's hot, right? And we find out that in their wanderings, they had split, right? And her half went north and the another half went south. The southern half ends up being the shepherd folk and the woodland folk that hang around Burgdale. So those are her people too. So she's pretty sure once they're reunited, they'll gladly help. And that she finds that the Burgdale men are their own class of, royal. She has various tests. And that she's sure they'll help. And she's at least sure that they would rather die free men than ever be slaves, which is true. They wouldn't. They don't want to be slaves at all. And so that's the setup. And we go back to town, and it is a long to do, and it's fun. I really do like, again, living through this, where it's explained, the situation's explained, the elders are gathered. Then we go out, we do this. A greater grouping of people is gathered. We elect a war chief. Obviously, it's going to be Face of God. We describe people movements. We really solidify because we end up grabbing some freed slaves who just really cement in how horrible these people are and that they're definitely coming. Right? We're really justifying the war here. I think they end up holding a thing. That's what they call it. It's, again, where we use the Stonehenge-like situation to everyone gather. We hash everything out in the open. Then we, sort of publicly declare our votes without any prejudice to that person. If he thinks we shouldn't fight, he'll say it and why. If he agrees to fight, he'll say it and why or why not. Of course, everyone agrees to fight because they're men. The bride shows up in full armor. And she's like, the battlefield shall be my home, and the after grief of the fight my banquet and holiday, that I may bear the burden of my people in the battle and out of it. Like in full regalia. They're fine with her fighting. They're just wondering why she's doing it. And you really get the sense of Éowyn, where, what is it? We're looking for something in this battle. Éowyn was looking for, I guess. Again, she had that royal blood, didn't she? And she wanted, to fulfill what that royal blood meant. She's worthy. We get that same kind of energy from this lady where she's clearly depressed that her marriage is off to this hot guy. Face of God, and that she'll let the gods of battle decide her fate. It's really great. Later, she ends up in a bit of a romance with Sunbeam, which is the friend. Sunbeam's brother. They end up in a cool romance. Very subtle, all the romance here. But it does stick to you, right? It's very sweet and it sticks to you. They all agree to just go en masse to Silverdale. That's the one they want to take out. And that they will then deal with Rosedale and the other ones in turn. Essentially all we have is a battle for a small town, right? In the streets of this town. It's all it is. There's no grand castle. There's no big, like, we're not in the middle of 200,000 men. It's not some super battle. But it manages to keep the epic flavor of a big-time battle. There are stakes. You don't know who's going to die. You have a lot of people you've met now along the course of the book who are in this fight. And I wish more modern authors would realize that you can have epic storylines without, you know, the fate of the entire world always hanging in the balance. You know? This one really does well after that. The fighting is vicious. It's never over the top, but you do understand, you know, dudes are getting stabbed in the face. People are dying. Bride ends up wounded in battle, and everyone's sure she died, right? It's same energy as Éowyn when her brother thought she had died, and he goes ham in the battle. The same thing happens with, what do I call him? Folkmite, right? Of course, she doesn't die. But they get the real great romantic, you know, either I'll be your wife or I'll share your grave because I'll be dead and then you'll follow me. We get this kind of heavy energy because for a while he thinks she's going to die, but she doesn't die, obviously. He ends up with her, and Folkmite ends up alderman, which is dude in charge of Silverdale. Now, he's earned his new title through battle. This is always the fair way to earn it. Either you're born a king or you can become a king through battle. It's for whatever reason. You know, people are okay accepting the gods of war as decreeing you're worthy, right? So, but he ends up now sort of alderman, which is dude in charge of a town. Of course, Face of God's going to end up with the better town, Burgdale. One of the freed slaves who ends up, you know, killing the rest of them ends up becoming alderman of Rosedale, right? And this is how we end the story. It winds down in a really good way. It doesn't just say, battle's over. It winds down. They take a long time to travel back to Burgdale. Again, you get the same energy as into the Lord of the Rings, where we're hanging around, we're eating festivals, and we're slowly moving along back. I get the same energy from it. I really do. You might or you might not. I don't know. You will. So it all ends peacefully. Everyone we like ends up married and in a proper place of honor. What is it? The final line. No more as now telleth the tale of these kindred and folk, but maketh an ending. That's just how it ends. To me, it's top tier writing. He's one of the best writers. If you love the written word, you'll love this. If not, though, if you're not sort of tenured in reading yet, if you're not an expert reader yet, really take time and go read a bunch of Shakespeare. And I think you'll be caught up enough that you'll be able to absorb this book and enjoy it. Otherwise, I think if you're too casual, you can admit you're a casual. We don't hate you here. If you're too casual, you'll think this is slow-paced and boring. But it really isn't. It's really a gem. And you can get this one for free on Amazon. The Roots of the Mountain by William Morris. All right. I've talked long enough. I took so many notes for this mess. Ad time? These are my books. They aren't free on Amazon. They cost you money. But that money helps me, which helps the channel. So if you want a good book, you can buy my book. I suppose, if I'm being honest, if you want a better book, you can get this William Morris one for free. But buying the books helps the channel. As of the filming of this, Kindle Unlimited, and you'll read them for the price of that subscription, amongst others. So, you know, you'll be sure to get value, even if you don't like my books. I can't tell if you'll like them or not. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you all. And I will talk to you next week.